The sands of Egypt have always whispered secrets, tales not carved into stone, but breathed into the wind. Beneath the desert sun, where time itself seems to sleep, lie the ruins of palaces that once pulsed with desire and danger. Welcome to the seductive courts of ancient Egypt, a world where love was a weapon, power was an aphrodisiac, and every glance, every whisper, could alter the fate of empires. Imagine walking through corridors of marble so polished they mirror the torchlight like liquid gold. The air is heavy with the scent of frankincense, lotus, and cinnamon, fragrances chosen not for beauty, but for power. Every note of perfume, every flicker of a lamp, was part of a grand design, a psychological orchestra meant to disarm the mind and awaken the senses. Golden statues of gods line the walls, their eyes following as if aware of the secrets unfolding before them. Here, in these opulent chambers, the heart and the throne were inseparable. This was Egypt, the cradle of beauty, the kingdom of seduction. To understand Egypt's passion is to understand its rulers, men and women who wielded intimacy as skillfully as they did armies. They built monuments that kissed the heavens, yet their most dangerous conquests took place in candlelit rooms scented with myrrh. And among these rulers, 3 names rise from the sands like living myths: Nefertiti, Cleopatra, and Hatshepsut. Each of them rewrote the language of love and power. Each knew that the art of seduction was not about beauty alone, but mastery over perception, emotion, and the human will. Queen Nefertiti, her name means, the beautiful one has come. But beauty was the least of her weapons. Alongside her husband, Pharaoh Akhenaten, she launched one of the boldest revolutions in Egyptian history, the worship of a single god, Aten, the sun itself. Together, they built a new city, Amarna, unlike anything the world had seen. There were no shadowed temples or gloomy tombs, only open courtyards flooded with light. The palace walls told not stories of conquest, but of tenderness, the king and queen laughing, kissing, holding their children. For the first time in royal history, power was portrayed through intimacy. Yet make no mistake, Nefertiti's softness was calculated. She understood that love could disarm where swords could not. Her vulnerability became her crown, her charm her armor. In the eyes of the people, she was not just a queen, she was divine emotion personified. In her private chambers, she designed spaces that blurred the line between sacred and sensual. Her bed, carved from cedar and inlaid with gold, sat beneath an open skylight through which sunlight poured every morning. She and Akhenaten would make love in the light of Aten himself, a symbolic union between human passion and divine creation. Every embrace became a prayer. Every kiss, a ritual. But the gods are jealous. The same light that made her divine would one day burn her name from history. When Akhenaten's revolution collapsed, Nefertiti vanished, erased from inscriptions, her tomb never found. Only her immortal bust remains, her gaze forever serene, as if she knew that real power outlives memory. Centuries later, another queen would take the stage, one whose seduction was sharper than a blade and whose name still echoes through time. Cleopatra. The woman Rome called a temptress, and history remembers as a goddess. But Cleopatra was not Egyptian by blood, she was Greek, descended from the generals of Alexander the Great. And though her beauty was famed, it was her mind that conquered empires. She spoke 9 languages, studied philosophy and astronomy, and understood human psychology in ways far ahead of her time. She didn't seduce with beauty, she seduced with brilliance. When Julius Caesar first arrived in Alexandria, he expected a desperate queen begging for his favor. Instead, Cleopatra staged one of the most legendary entrances in history, having herself smuggled into his chambers rolled inside a carpet. When the carpet unfurled, she emerged like a living vision of power and wit. That single act flipped the power dynamic forever. She was not the supplicant, she was the prize. And Caesar, the world's most powerful man, was instantly caught in her web. Cleopatra's palace was an extension of her strategy, every wall, every fragrance, every reflection designed to enchant. Her private bath was carved from pink granite, its waters perfumed with milk, honey, and rose petals. The ceiling above her shimmered like the night sky, painted with constellations that slowly rotated as the hours passed. Negotiating with Cleopatra was not like speaking with a queen, it was like entering a dream. She made her guests forget where they stood, who they were, even what they wanted. She was the fantasy they couldn't escape. Her power wasn't just political, it was psychological. Cleopatra made men feel chosen, and that illusion was her deadliest weapon. Julius Caesar fell, and after him, Mark Antony. Both men risked everything for her, their power, their nations, even their lives. And when Antony finally died in her arms, Cleopatra chose to die too, by the bite of an asp, not as a defeated queen, but as a goddess returning to her throne in eternity. Her final act was the ultimate seduction, to make death itself her lover. Then there was Hatshepsut, the woman who defied every law of man and God to crown herself pharaoh. In a world ruled by men, she became both king and queen, mother and god. Her reign lasted over 2 decades, during which she transformed Egypt into a golden empire of art, trade, and power. But what truly set Hatshepsut apart was her understanding of performance. She turned her entire reign into theater. Her palace at Deir el-Bahari rose like a mirage from the cliffs, terraces layered in symmetry, each level drawing visitors higher and higher toward the throne. The journey to meet her was no accident. It was designed to humble. By the time foreign dignitaries reached her chamber, they were breathless, overwhelmed, and ready to believe they were in the presence of a divine being. And when she finally spoke, her voice, echoing through stone, seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, like the whisper of the gods themselves. Hatshepsut mastered duality. By day, she was pharaoh, depicted in statues wearing the royal beard, standing tall as a warrior king. By night, in her private chambers, she returned to herself, a woman adorned with gold, perfumed with jasmine, surrounded by silk and secrets. She moved between these worlds effortlessly, reshaping what it meant to be powerful, and reminding her court that the greatest rulers were those who could command both awe and desire. But Egypt's seductive magic didn't live only in its queens. The royal courts themselves were living instruments of temptation. Inside the palace walls, pleasure and politics intertwined. The pharaoh's harem was not a cage of women, it was a council of influence. Every consort represented an alliance, a territory, a whisper of power. The women of the royal court were trained not only in beauty, but in philosophy, music, and strategy. They discussed trade over wine, planned wars over song, and shaped the destiny of Egypt with words softer than silk. To walk through those palaces was to enter a world where reality itself bent to emotion. Where love was ritual, seduction was statecraft, and desire ruled empires. From Nefertiti's sunlit chambers to Cleopatra's moonlit baths, from Hatshepsut's echoing halls to the perfumed harems of Ramses, Egypt perfected the most dangerous art of all, the art of making power irresistible. Even now, when the night wind sighs across the Nile, they say you can still hear the laughter of queens and the soft chime of golden anklets fading into the dark. Because in Egypt, nothing truly dies, not beauty, not power, and certainly not desire. The desert wind changes as centuries pass, but Egypt never forgets the art of seduction. The old temples crumble, the golden gods fade, yet one name rises from the ashes like a whisper from the Nile, Cleopatra. The last pharaoh of Egypt, a woman whose beauty has been immortalized, and whose mind was sharper than any blade forged in the fires of her empire. In the marble halls of Alexandria, Cleopatra ruled not merely as a queen, but as a storm. She was fluent in 9 languages, trained in politics, philosophy, and the secrets of persuasion. Her throne was not only built upon gold, it was built upon knowledge. When she spoke, even Rome listened. And when she smiled, even her enemies hesitated. But Cleopatra understood something few rulers ever grasped, that true power lies not in fear, but in fascination. She turned her palace into a living theater of temptation. The air itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with her heartbeat. Perfumed lamps burned through the night, releasing the scent of jasmine, lotus, and honey. Musicians played soft lyres behind veils, while servants moved like shadows, unseen yet omnipresent. Every inch of her court was designed to intoxicate. When Julius Caesar entered Alexandria, he did not meet a frightened queen, he met a masterpiece. Wrapped in a carpet, Cleopatra had herself smuggled into Caesar's private chamber. And when the silk unfurled, out stepped not a prisoner, but a goddess reborn. Her eyes met his, calm yet daring, and in that single moment, Caesar, conqueror of nations, became the conquered. Cleopatra's seduction was never about the body alone. It was about power, intellect, and presence. She spoke to Caesar as an equal, not a lover begging for favor. She understood his dreams, mirrored his ambitions, and flattered his pride without a single word of flattery. By the time the Roman general realized her influence, Egypt had already regained its stability under her rule. But love, in Cleopatra's world, was a dangerous currency. When Caesar fell to the knives of his enemies, she turned to Mark Antony, Rome's most formidable warrior. Their union was not born in innocence, it was a performance for the gods. Together, they staged feasts so grand that the air itself shimmered with wine and gold. They called themselves Dionysus and Isis, gods of ecstasy and rebirth, and the world watched in awe. In her palace by the Nile, Antony and Cleopatra would dine beneath ceilings of sapphire and silver. The floors were covered with rose petals that slaves replaced every hour so their feet would never touch the dust of the earth. Perfume dripped from fountains, and golden goblets overflowed with crimson wine. They ruled as lovers, but behind the laughter and the music, both knew, the walls of Rome were closing in. Theirs was a love doomed by empire. When the Roman armies advanced under Octavian, Cleopatra's charm could no longer save her throne. Antony fell upon his own sword, dying in her arms as the torches flickered and the night wept. And Cleopatra, the queen who once ruled kings, chose death over humiliation. She lay upon her golden couch, draped in silk, her crown still upon her head, and let the venom of an asp steal her final breath. As her body grew still, a strange silence filled the chamber. Outside, the Nile flowed on, ancient, eternal, indifferent. Rome would call her a temptress, a witch, a destroyer of men. But Egypt would remember her as the last goddess who dared to love in a world ruled by fear. The seductive courts of Egypt were never about sin or scandal. They were about survival. In a world where men ruled by sword, women like Cleopatra ruled by soul. Her palace may have turned to dust, her jewels to sand, but her legacy, her power, her allure, still breathes in every story whispered beneath the Egyptian moon. And yet, long before Cleopatra or after her fall, there was another, a woman who wore no jewels, no perfumes, but carried the same divine fire in her eyes. Her name was Hatshepsut, the pharaoh who became a king. Long before Cleopatra's feasts and Nefertiti's sunlit temples, there lived a woman whose seduction was not of flesh, but of destiny itself. Her name was Hatshepsut, and she dared to claim what no woman had before, the throne of Egypt. She was born into royalty, daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I, raised in the rituals of the gods and the endless echo of power. But when her father died, the crown passed not to her, but to a young prince, her half-brother, Thutmose II. By custom, she became his queen. By nature, she became his equal. When her husband died too soon, leaving only a child heir, Egypt faced chaos. But Hatshepsut did not tremble. She rose, quietly, gracefully, and took control, first as a regent, then as pharaoh. Yet Egypt was not ready to see a woman rule. So Hatshepsut performed the ultimate illusion. She became both woman and man, queen and king, lover and god. In her coronation carvings, she appears not as a soft, veiled beauty, but as a pharaoh with broad shoulders, a ceremonial beard, and the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. But those who looked closer knew, behind the limestone mask was still the beating heart of a woman who had conquered the impossible. Hatshepsut's seduction was subtle, psychological, spiritual, divine. She did not tempt men with her eyes or her smile. She tempted history itself to believe her. Her court became a stage where reality and illusion danced together. Sculptors carved her like a man, but inscribed her name with feminine endings. Priests bowed before her, half in awe, half in confusion. And through this dance of identities, she ruled for over 2 decades, one of the most peaceful and prosperous reigns in Egyptian history. Her palace at Deir el-Bahari, rising from the cliffs like a hymn in stone, was not built for war or vanity, it was built for eternity. Its terraces bloomed with gardens, its columns sang with the wind, and its walls told a story that defied gender, power, and mortality. She traded not with swords, but with ships. Her famous expedition to Punt brought back treasures never seen before, ivory, incense, exotic trees, and gold. Egypt flourished under her touch, as though the gods themselves favored her daring. And yet, beneath her calm, there lingered a storm, the knowledge that every triumph she achieved was forbidden. Because Hatshepsut was not just ruling Egypt, she was rewriting its rules. And that made her dangerous. As the years passed, whispers grew in the shadows of her court. Priests murmured of divine order disrupted. Generals questioned their place under a woman's command. Even her stepson, Thutmose III, waited patiently, his heart burning with resentment. When she finally vanished, whether by death, disease, or dagger, Egypt's scribes began their slow erasure. Her statues were smashed, her name chiseled from the walls, her face scraped from history. For centuries, it was as though she had never existed. But stone remembers what men forget. And as archaeologists brushed the dust from her temple thousands of years later, the truth re-emerged, that Egypt's greatest seduction was never of body or beauty, but of belief. Hatshepsut had seduced time itself. She taught the world that power has no gender, that rule can be as graceful as it is fierce. And though her image was destroyed, her legacy still whispers through the cliffs of Thebes, soft, proud, unyielding. Pause, ambient wind and soft Egyptian harp fade in. 3 queens. 3 centuries apart. Yet bound by the same truth, in ancient Egypt, seduction was not just an act of desire. It was a language of survival. From Nefertiti's sacred light to Cleopatra's perfumed empire and Hatshepsut's mask of divinity, each woman proved that the heart of Egypt beat not in the swords of its kings, but in the souls of its queens. And when the night falls over the ruins of Thebes, when the Nile glows under the moonlight, one can almost hear their laughter echoing through time, soft, defiant, eternal. The seductive courts of ancient Egypt have long turned to dust. But their stories still burn, bright as the sun, fierce as love, and timeless as the sands themselves. Night has fallen over the Nile. The sky glows deep blue, heavy with stars, the same stars that once shimmered above the palaces of Thebes, Amarna, and Alexandria. The wind whispers through the ruins, brushing against stones that have seen empires rise and fall. The gods are silent now, their temples broken, their names fading into sand. Yet, in the stillness, something remains. Egypt, the cradle of beauty, magic, and deception, was never ruled by kings alone. Beneath the crowns of its pharaohs, it was the queens who shaped destiny. Nefertiti, with her divine light, turned faith into seduction. She made devotion itself an act of love. Her beauty was not just of skin, but of spirit, the kind that bends hearts and reshapes empires. In her eyes, the sun found worship, in her touch, the gods found home. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, redefined power through intellect and allure. She was the storm that no man could tame, a woman who could charm Caesar, captivate Antony, and outwit the Roman Senate, all while holding her nation together through the sheer gravity of her will. Her throne was built not from gold, but from the hearts she conquered. And Hatshepsut, the silent miracle of her time, she seduced history itself. She wore the face of a king, the crown of a god, and the soul of a woman unafraid of eternity. Her reign was proof that power, when worn with grace, becomes immortal. 3 women. 3 different centuries. But one legacy, written not in ink, but in desire. Soft pause, sound of flowing water. The seductive courts of ancient Egypt were never simply places of pleasure. They were battlegrounds of emotion, where love became strategy, faith became theater, and beauty became war. Every whisper behind those stone walls had meaning. Every glance could birth a revolution. Every secret could destroy a dynasty. And yet, perhaps that is why their stories still haunt us. Because they remind us that beneath every crown lies a heartbeat. Beneath every empire, a human longing, to be seen, to be desired, to be remembered. The Nile still flows as it once did, carrying the memory of their laughter. The moon still paints the sand in silver, as if lighting the way for their souls. Somewhere, under the dust of centuries, Nefertiti still smiles, Cleopatra still waits, and Hatshepsut still dreams. And if you stand quietly in the ruins of Thebes or the shadow of Luxor, you might feel it, the soft warmth of their presence, the pull of their charm. Not ghosts, but echoes. Not lost queens, but eternal ones. Because true seduction, the kind born of power, courage, and spirit, never dies. It lingers. It breathes. It rules. The seductive courts of ancient Egypt may be gone, but their legacy remains, carved into every temple, painted on every wall, and written into the soul of history itself. A reminder that even in a world built by men, it was the women, the queens, who taught the world how to rule with both fire and grace. The centuries rolled forward like waves over the desert. Empires came, and empires fell, Greece, Rome, Byzantium, each one trying to bury Egypt beneath its own glory. But Egypt was never a place that stayed buried for long. It lived, quietly, beneath the dust, waiting for its heartbeat to be heard again. And when explorers came, thousands of years later, with shovels and lanterns, they did not just uncover stones, they uncovered souls. The faces of Nefertiti, Cleopatra, and Hatshepsut emerged from the sand as if time itself had been holding its breath. Their stories, once erased by kings and conquerors, now return to life, not in temples or scrolls, but in us. Because these women were not merely rulers. They were symbols of the eternal struggle between power and passion. They were proof that seduction is not weakness, it is strength wrapped in softness, wisdom hidden behind a smile. When archaeologists lifted the bust of Nefertiti from her tomb, the light touched her stone face. Calm, poised, perfect, and the world fell silent. Her gaze, carved 3,000 years ago, still had the power to command attention. It was as though the queen herself had returned, watching us, testing whether humanity had learned anything from the empires she once ruled. And Cleopatra, her name still burns like fire in the human mind. The woman who faced the greatest empire on earth not with armies, but with presence. History tried to paint her as a temptress, but in truth, she was a strategist, the last flame of a dying civilization, holding back the dark with her wit and will. Even in her death, she chose her own fate. The snake was not her end, it was her final act of control. Then there is Hatshepsut, the forgotten pharaoh. For centuries, her name was dust, her image shattered by those who feared her strength. But time is a strange ally. What men tried to destroy, eternity decided to preserve. Her temple still stands in perfect harmony with the cliffs of Deir el-Bahari, untouched by war or pride. Every sunrise that strikes its columns whispers her truth, that greatness wears many faces, and courage has no gender. These were the queens who seduced the world not with sin, but with purpose. They understood something we still struggle to grasp, that beauty is not the opposite of power, it is another form of it. They turned emotion into politics, love into leadership, and desire into destiny. Today, as we walk through the ruins of their palaces, we are walking through mirrors of ourselves. The marble may be broken, the gold may be gone, but the human heart remains the same. We still crave what they craved, love, legacy, and the illusion of control. Perhaps that is why Egypt still fascinates us. Because deep down, every one of us carries a fragment of those ancient queens, a spark of defiance, a hunger for meaning, a desire to be remembered. So when you stand before the Nile and the wind brushes your skin, know this, you are not alone. The queens are still there. Watching. Waiting. Whispering through the sands. They are the laughter in the ruins, the warmth in the sunlight, the echo in the stone. And as long as stories are told, their seduction will never end. Because Egypt was never about death. It was always about rebirth. And in the quiet pulse of the desert night, the seductive courts of ancient Egypt still live. In every breath of the wind, in every shimmer of gold, and in every dream of power and love that refuses to fade. The story of Egypt did not end when the last pharaoh fell. It simply changed form. The palaces turned to dust, the gold to legend, but the spirit of seduction, the power of influence, never truly disappeared. It only moved into new courts. Today, those courts look different. They are not made of limestone and marble, but of glass towers, velvet rooms, and glowing screens. The perfumes have changed, the clothing has changed, but the game is the same. The rulers of the modern world still play by ancient rules. A single whisper can change an empire. A well-timed glance can seal a deal. A charming lie can destroy a nation faster than any army. Power has always spoken the same language, the language of desire. If Cleopatra were alive today, she wouldn't need a throne of gold or a fleet of ships. She would rule through a lens, her eyes captivating millions through a single screen. Her profile would crash networks, her voice would command nations. And if Nefertiti walked among us, the world would still stop to see her, not for her beauty alone, but for the way she carried silence like a crown. We still build monuments, not from stone, but from fame, followers, and fleeting attention. We still worship gods, only now they are wealth, youth, and the illusion of perfection. And we still trade in seduction, the same ancient currency that once built empires along the Nile. But perhaps that is what makes the story of Egypt so hauntingly beautiful. It reminds us that beneath every civilization, no matter how advanced, how digital, how rational, there beats the same ancient heart. A heart that desires. A heart that dreams. A heart that believes love can rewrite destiny. The women of Egypt understood this better than anyone. They wore their wisdom like perfume, their beauty like strategy, their silence like prophecy. They were not just women of their time, they were architects of eternity. When the wind moves across the Nile tonight, it carries their memory. The scent of lotus, the sound of silk, the echo of laughter that once filled marble halls. If you listen closely, you might hear it, that whisper of a queen reminding the world that power without grace is empty, and love without purpose is dust. So tonight, as you drift between waking and sleep, imagine walking once more through those ancient corridors, the air heavy with incense, the torches flickering gold against the walls. You are not a visitor there. You are part of the story. Because the seductive courts of ancient Egypt were never just a chapter in history. They are a mirror held up to us all. Power. Beauty. Desire. Legacy. They ruled then. They rule still. The night deepens over the desert. The stars above the Nile shimmer like forgotten jewels, each one carrying the memory of a dynasty long gone. The wind sighs softly through the ruins, brushing against stone walls that once heard the laughter of queens and the secrets of kings. If you stand there long enough, beneath that endless sky, you can almost feel time itself breathing. Because Egypt never truly vanished. It only sank deeper into the soul of humanity, waiting for dreamers and wanderers to uncover it again. Every grain of sand out here is a fragment of a life once lived. Every temple's shadow holds the ghost of a voice that once commanded the world. And somewhere, between the hum of the wind and the pulse of the earth, the spirits of the Nile still speak. They speak of passion that outlived kingdoms. Of beauty that defied time. Of women who wielded love like a sword, and men who learned too late that desire can be the most dangerous kind of power. Listen closely. You might hear them. The laughter of Cleopatra drifting on the breeze. The quiet prayer of Nefertiti as the first light of dawn kissed her face. The measured footsteps of Hatshepsut walking her temple corridors, each stride echoing the truth, that no empire is eternal, but greatness always leaves a trace. History books can tell you who ruled, who built, who conquered. But they cannot tell you how it felt. The warmth of a lover's breath in a marble chamber. The scent of lotus in the night air. The fear and fire that lived inside every glance across a throne room. That is where true history lives, not in ink, but in emotion. Not in museums, but in memory. And maybe that's why we return to Egypt again and again. Because somewhere deep inside, we remember it. Not with our minds, but with our souls. We remember the way the sun burned over Thebes. The way gold shimmered on the skin of gods. The way a single kiss could change the fate of nations. So, as the desert sleeps beneath its blanket of stars, and the Nile flows like liquid moonlight, remember this. Power fades. Beauty fades. Kingdoms crumble. But the story never dies. Because the seductive courts of ancient Egypt were not just built in stone. They were built in the human heart. The night has grown still. Only the desert breathes now, slow, ancient, endless. And as the stars drift westward, their light glides softly over forgotten temples, broken statues, and the bones of gods. But listen closer. Because if you quiet your mind, truly quiet it, you'll hear something beyond the sand and stone. A voice. Not of the living, but of those who lived with such fire, their echoes refused to die. They called to us not with words, but with longing. With the ache of memories too powerful to fade. A priestess weeping for her lost lover beneath the moonlight. A young servant girl whispering secrets to the river. A pharaoh dreaming of eternity, his heart trapped between love and legacy. These were not just rulers and courtiers, they were human. They loved, they lied, they bled. They reached for immortality, and in doing so, gave birth to the myth of Egypt itself. The gods may have turned their faces away. The temples may have fallen. But desire, that wild, sacred flame, never left the land of the Nile. It hides beneath every papyrus scroll, behind every carving, in every gaze of a painted queen whose eyes still follow you across time. Perhaps that is why Egypt calls to dreamers and wanderers even now. Because we too are haunted. Haunted by the same hunger for meaning, for beauty, for something greater than ourselves. We build cities, we chase love, we fight for power. Just as they did. And in the end, like them, we return to dust. Hoping that someone, someday, will remember us not for our crowns or conquests, but for the fire in our hearts. So when you next see the golden glow of sunrise, remember the queens who once watched it rise from their palace balconies. When you hear the soft murmur of water, remember the Nile, carrying their laughter, their tears, their secrets to the sea, because history is not behind us. It walks beside us, hand in hand, whispering reminders of who we were, and who we still are. The seductive courts of ancient Egypt were never about lust alone. They were about power, the kind that lives in beauty, in mystery, in the courage to love when love was forbidden. And perhaps, deep down, that is why their stories still hold us captive. Because we see ourselves in them. In Cleopatra's fire. In Nefertiti's grace. In the endless search for immortality through love. The desert sleeps now. But beneath the silence, beneath the endless sea of sand, something still burns. A small, invisible flame, the same one that once lit the halls of Thebes and glimmered in the eyes of a queen. It is the flame of longing. Of beauty. Of the timeless hunger to be remembered. Every century buries its empires. And yet, somehow, Egypt endures. Not in its walls or its treasures, those have long since turned to dust. But in the way it makes us feel. In the way it whispers to our deepest desires, reminding us that love and power are never truly gone, they only change form. Somewhere in the vast desert, a traveler lights a lantern. He stands where once a goddess was worshipped, and for a brief, trembling moment, the centuries collapse. He feels her presence, proud, graceful, watching. And in that moment, he understands. The dead are not gone. They simply wait for us to listen. Maybe that's why the stories of Egypt never fade. Because they were never just stories. They were confessions, written in stone, carved in gold, sealed in tombs by hands trembling with love and fear. Cleopatra's sigh. Nefertiti's glance. A forbidden kiss in a garden where the moon dared not shine too bright. These are not fragments of a dead civilization. They are fragments of us, of what we once were, and what we still crave to be. So tonight, as you sit in the quiet, remember them. The queens who defied kings. The lovers who risked eternity. The dreamers who turned sand into immortality. Because their world, though lost in time, still lives within ours. Every heartbeat carries a trace of that same ancient fire. And perhaps, someday, when the world grows silent again, when all our cities crumble and our voices fade, someone will stand over our ruins and wonder about us. Who we were. What we desired. What we dared to love. That is the truth of Egypt. It was never merely a place. It was a mirror. And when we gaze into it, we see ourselves. Our beauty, our cruelty, our endless thirst to be more than mortal. So, as the last grains of sand drift through the wind, and the desert wraps itself once more in moonlight, listen carefully. The courts of ancient Egypt may be gone, but their whispers remain. They move through time, through memory, through every dreamer who dares to look back. And if you listen closely, you might still hear the sound of silk moving in the dark, of gold catching firelight, of a queen's quiet laughter beneath the stars. The night begins to fade. The stars retreat, their glow melting into the first whispers of dawn. And in that pale golden light, the desert breathes again. For a brief moment, just before day fully awakens, it feels as though time hesitates. The air grows warm. The dunes shimmer. And the past, almost stirs. Somewhere beneath the ancient sand, the courts of Egypt still dream. They dream of music and laughter, of golden crowns and perfumed nights, of hearts that burn too brightly to ever be forgotten. And though the centuries have silenced their voices, the memory of what they were, of who they were, still lingers. The pharaohs are gone. The queens have turned to dust. But what they loved, what they fought for, what they desired, those things live on in us. Because we too build our little kingdoms. Not with stone and gold, but with moments. With glances, with words, with the people we choose to love and betray. We, too, are haunted by power, beauty, and the hunger to be remembered. Perhaps that's why the story of Egypt feels so familiar. Because it is not just history. It is the reflection of everything we are, our light and our darkness, our rise and our fall. Every life becomes a civilization in its own way. Every soul, a kingdom of memory. And though the sands of time will one day cover us too, the stories we leave behind, the love, the pain, the truth, will keep whispering. Maybe one day, far into the future, someone will stand where we once stood. They'll dig through the ruins of our world and ask, who were they? What did they feel? What did they believe in? And if we are lucky, if we live with passion and courage, perhaps the sands will remember us kindly. The courts of Egypt may be lost, but their spirit still walks beside us. In every moment we dare to love as fiercely as Cleopatra. To dream as boldly as Nefertiti. To rise from silence as fearlessly as Hatshepsut. So tonight, as this story fades into stillness, remember this. The past is never truly gone. It waits for us, in echoes, in dreams, in every heartbeat that still believes in beauty. If you've listened this far, then maybe, somewhere deep inside, a part of Egypt now lives within you too. Maybe you can still hear it. The soft rustle of silk in a candlelit chamber. The faint laughter of a queen behind her jeweled veil. The endless heartbeat of the Nile, carrying secrets through time. Every story we tell is a bridge. A fragile link between what was and what still might be. And tonight, that bridge carried us back to a world where love and power danced together. Where beauty could both save and destroy. But Egypt's greatest secret was never buried in tombs or hidden in gold. It lives in the human heart. In our longing to be seen, to be remembered, to be loved beyond time itself. So as you close your eyes tonight, and the desert fades from your mind, let its whispers stay with you. Soft, haunting, eternal. Because history is not a story we leave behind. It's a story that keeps finding us. Centuries later, the golden halls that once echoed with laughter, music, and whispered conspiracies fell silent beneath drifting sands. The perfumes that once perfumed Cleopatra's chambers vanished into the dry air, leaving behind only faint traces of myrrh and honey in the cracks of crumbled stone. The temples that had witnessed divine unions turned to ruins, their columns broken like the ribs of a long-forgotten god. Yet Egypt never truly died, it only went to sleep, waiting for the world to rediscover its secrets. When the first European explorers set foot along the Nile, they expected dust, death, and decay. What they found instead was seduction that refused to fade. Every tomb, every hieroglyph, every buried statue seemed to breathe with sensual life. In 1799, when Napoleon's men uncovered the Rosetta Stone, they did more than unlock language, they woke a civilization. Egypt began to whisper again. The same voices that once spoke in marble halls now spoke through fragments of papyrus and the painted eyes of queens who refused to be forgotten. As archaeologists dug deeper, they unearthed not just relics but emotions, letters of love, offerings of perfume bottles still faintly scented after 3,000 years, cosmetics preserved like sacred charms. Each discovery felt like eavesdropping on eternity. In the Valley of the Kings, tomb walls told stories of passion disguised as religion. Carvings showed gods embracing mortals, their bodies entwined in scenes that defied the line between devotion and desire. But perhaps the most haunting discovery came from a tomb that bore no royal name. Deep beneath the sand near Luxor, a chamber was found with murals depicting a queen and her lover, their faces pressed close, their hands interlocked in eternal embrace. No record exists of their reign, no scroll mentions their names. Yet the art tells everything: forbidden love, defiance of gods, and the price paid for passion in a world ruled by divine law. Some say it was Nefertiti's lost daughter. Others believe it was Cleopatra's handmaiden, buried alive with her secrets. No one knows for sure. But the emotion etched into stone still trembles under torchlight, a love too dangerous to live, too powerful to die. Today, when we walk through museums and stare into the painted eyes of ancient queens, we're not just seeing history, we're looking into mirrors. Because the game of seduction, the hunger for power, the illusion of control, none of it has changed. We still build our modern palaces, boardrooms, parliaments, red carpets, where glances decide fates and whispers destroy empires. The same drama that played out along the Nile continues in new forms, dressed in glass and steel instead of gold and lapis. And if you listen closely, in the quiet halls of Cairo's museum, or in the sands near the Valley of the Queens, you can almost hear it. The faint echo of silk rustling, a laugh from behind a curtain, the clink of gold bracelets against marble. The seductive courts of ancient Egypt are not gone. They're just waiting, beneath time's veil, alive in every story we tell about power, beauty, and the dangerous art of desire. The desert night falls heavy over the Valley of the Kings. The wind moves through the ruins like a whisper, carrying with it the sighs of queens and pharaohs who once ruled the rhythm of hearts and empires. Beneath the cold stars, the ancient sands hide 1,000 stories still untold, and one of them, they say, belongs to a woman history tried to erase. Her name was lost, but the ancients called her the Veiled One. She wasn't a queen by birth, nor a concubine of noble blood. She was a foreign dancer brought to the court of Pharaoh Seti II, a gift from a visiting kingdom, meant only to entertain. But she danced differently from the others. Her movements weren't just performance, they were prophecy. When she danced, the flame of every lamp trembled, as if the gods themselves watched. Pharaoh watched, too. And from that moment, Egypt would never be the same. She moved through the palace like a secret, silent, unseen, yet felt everywhere. Servants whispered that the pharaoh's eyes followed her even during council meetings, that he dreamed of her voice long after the music faded. His queen, fierce and proud, tried to banish her from the court. But Seti refused. He built her a hidden chamber beneath the temple of Hathor, the goddess of love and beauty, where they met under moonlight. There, among alabaster walls and lotus-filled pools, they created their own world, a forbidden paradise hidden from priests, generals, and gods. But Egypt was a kingdom that ran on order, and love was chaos. The priests of Ammonius, jealous of their pharaoh's devotion to a dancer, declared her cursed, a temptress sent to lead Egypt astray. Rumors spread like wildfire through Thebes, the Nile had begun to recede, the crops were failing, the gods were angry. Every misfortune became her fault. And so, in the dead of night, Pharaoh's guards stormed her chamber. Some say she vanished before they arrived, her silks left fluttering in the candlelight, her perfume still heavy in the air. Others say she was buried alive beneath the temple she once graced, sealed away as a sacrifice to appease divine wrath. No one truly knows. But centuries later, when excavators dug beneath that same temple, they found a sealed chamber, walls covered in gold leaf and strange inscriptions. And in the center, a single alabaster jar filled with dried lotus petals and a faint trace of ancient perfume. To this day, the scent is said to drive those who inhale it into vivid dreams, visions of a woman dancing under moonlight, her eyes full of both sorrow and fire. Some archaeologists dismiss it as myth. Others refuse to speak of it at all. But every now and then, a visitor to the temple of Hathor swears they've seen her shadow move across the stone, graceful, eternal, waiting. And maybe that's the real secret of the seductive courts of Egypt, that their power was never buried. The gold may have faded, the thrones may have crumbled, but desire endures. It lingers like perfume in the air, invisible yet inescapable. Because long after the gods have fallen silent, it's the whispers of passion, the echoes of forbidden love, that still hold the world in their grip. The moon rises above the Nile once more, its light shimmering across the ancient waters. Somewhere, in the distance, a temple bell rings, and for just a moment, the veil between past and present lifts. The courts of Egypt breathe again. The dancers move. The pharaohs dream. And you, yes, you, are standing among them, drawn into the eternal dance where love, power, and destiny have always been one and the same. The centuries turned, but the sand remembered. Beneath the shifting dunes, the heart of ancient Egypt still beat, slow, patient, waiting for its next breath of life. Every generation thought it had uncovered all her secrets, but Egypt always kept one more, buried a little deeper, wrapped in silk and shadow. It was the year 1923 when a group of British archaeologists working near Abydos stumbled upon something extraordinary, a hidden passage beneath the ruins of an ancient temple. The air inside was thick and sweet, not like the dry rot of other tombs. It carried a faint trace of jasmine and myrrh, as if someone had only recently left the room. They followed the passage down into darkness until their lanterns revealed a vast underground hall, its walls alive with color even after 3,000 years. At the center stood a massive stone door carved with the image of a woman, beautiful, regal, her arms outstretched like wings. Beneath her was an inscription that read, "To those who love beyond life, the goddess grants eternity." They had found the lost sanctuary of Akhenaten, the widow of Tutankhamun, a queen whose love story was buried deeper than her husband's golden tomb. History remembered her only as the girl queen who vanished after Tutankhamun's death. But the hieroglyphs on these walls told another story, one of passion, rebellion, and forbidden love that defied both gods and kings. After the boy king's death, Akhenaten had been trapped, a widow in a court that saw her not as a woman, but as a threat. To survive, she made a desperate choice. She reached out not to an Egyptian, but to a foreign king, the ruler of the Hittites, Egypt's sworn enemies. In a letter carved onto thin sheets of gold, she begged him for one of his sons to marry her, to make her queen again and save her from the priests who wished her gone. It was the most scandalous act in Egyptian history, a royal woman offering herself to a foreigner. The Hittite prince accepted and traveled toward Egypt. But he never arrived. He was murdered on the road before crossing the border, his body vanishing into the sands. The message was clear, Akhenaten had defied the gods and would pay the price. No record ever mentioned her again. Until now. The walls of her sanctuary told of what happened next, a secret the priests buried to protect the royal bloodline. It was said that after her foreign lover was slain, Akhenaten disappeared into the desert, taking with her a handful of loyal servants and sacred relics from Tutankhamun's tomb. They built a hidden sanctuary where she could mourn, far from the reach of men. And there, she invoked the goddess Hathor, offering her beauty, her body, and her soul to the heavens. In return, the goddess gave her what no mortal could, an eternal form carved not from gold or stone, but from the memory of desire itself. The murals showed her transformation, Akhenaten wrapped in silk, standing before a pool that reflected the stars. She drank from a golden chalice, and her reflection changed, her eyes glowing like flame, her body dissolving into light. The text ended with a single line. She became the scent on the wind, the eternal whisper of Egypt. When the archaeologists opened the final chamber, they found no mummy. Only a gold mirror, perfectly polished after 3,000 years. Those who looked into it claimed they saw her face, not as a corpse, but alive, smiling, radiant. Some fainted. One man refused to speak of what he saw and left the dig site that very night, never to return. The mirror was sent to Cairo, where it remains locked in a vault, sealed by order of the government after strange incidents in the museum. Guards reported a woman's perfume drifting through empty halls. Security cameras flickered without explanation. One curator swore he heard music, faint, distant, the soft rhythm of anklets in motion.